Hello, everyone. I'm Jason Samuels coming to you from the CCO headquarters here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Thank you for taking the time to join us for the CCO Lab today. You're in for a treat. We're going to have a good time together. If you're new and you don't know what the CCO is, it stands for the Coalition of Christian Outreach, and we are a college campus ministry that partners with local churches to reach campuses that are nearby, evangelizing students with the gospel of Jesus Christ, and then discipling them with a vision that everything belongs to God. And that includes their major and their job, their vocation one day. And that's exactly what we're going to be talking about today. A few items of housekeeping as we get going here. If you enjoy the conversation today and what you hear, there's some ways that you can engage with us a little deeper down the road. If you're in the DC area or know anybody that is in the DC area, coming up in just under a month, we have an event called Beyond Sunday that's happening. It's going to be a lot of conversation around the topics that we're covering today. It's about a half-day seminar. We'd love to have you join us or invite whoever you know in that area to join us. Similarly, we have an event right before our Jubilee Conference, which is the marquee conference that we do for all of our students here in Pittsburgh. That Friday, we take a day and we have a similar conference here called Jubilee Professional. Sometimes we call it Jubilee Pro. That's happening February 16th. So you could join us there. And last but not least, believe it or not, it's almost Christmas time. I can't believe I'm saying that. And in the church, as you know, we celebrate the Advent season. And we at the CCO for the last few years have put together a really terrific Advent devotional. And we'd love to have you sign up for that. Link should be in the chat there, and follow along with us as we go through the Advent season and get ready to celebrate the birth of Jesus at Christmas. Let me give you a little rundown here of what we're going to do, and then we'll jump right in. We're going to be online here for an hour total, and so a little less than that at this point. Missy's going to come on and talk to us, present, have a little conversation, and then we'll have time for question and answer at the end. So if you have a question that you would like us to ask or try to get it in there, throw it in the chat, or also you'll see in the chat there'll be a number you could text your question into as well, and we'll try to get to as many of those as we can at the end of our time together here. So without further ado, let me introduce Missy, and then we'll bring her on. There she is. Missy, you've done all kinds of things, been in the corporate world for a decade or more with Time Warner, Boston Consulting Group, then kind of she's moved into the world of secondary education for another 10 years, and then moved into our space here that we're going to be talking about, and founded the Nashville Institute for Faith and Work, and then became the managing director with Tim Keller's organization, City to City, where she had a variety of responsibilities there, including heading up the Global Faith and Work Initiative. Currently on sabbatical, which sounds pretty awesome, and hiked 500 miles of the Camino de Santiago, which, if I remember, it starts in France, right? And then goes down through Spain, ends in Spain. Yeah, so pretty impressive. So we're super excited to have Missy here. Thanks for being here. All the way from Nashville, right? You're in Nashville.
Nashville. Dialing in from Nashville today. So I'm so glad to be here. Looking forward to it. Thank you.
Yeah, we're looking forward to this conversation. It's really germane to the students that we serve, but also the professionals that are on today. You know, we are excited to hear about connecting our work to God's redemptive plan and making meaning out of that. So thank you for being here, and thank you for sharing. I'll let you take it away.
Sure, thank you. And for all of you listening, I would love for you to throw what industry or what area of work you work in. And when we get to the Q&A, that may be helpful for me to understand who's listening. But today we're really going to talk about finding the redemptive edge in your work, no matter what your work is. I am having a hard time progressing the slides. So today we're going to talk about what is faith and work and why do we need to talk about it. And I'm going to share 3 frameworks to really guide you to help you think about it when you're in your work. And then I'm going to talk about how to take an industry and think about the creational good and the wickedly broken within your industry, and share a story of change or two, or what can happen when you really do engage your faith in the workplace. But first, let's start with the definition of what is work. So a definition I got from a dictionary is that work is an activity involving mental or physical effort done in order to achieve a purpose or a result. And so basically the way I like to think of it is anything that's not rest and not leisure. Anything that's not rest and not leisure. And so as you know, we can have paid work, we can have unpaid work. This morning I unloaded a dishwasher. It's not my favorite way to work, but that is an area of work. And now I'm teaching a seminar, which is actually an area of paid work. So work can involve a lot of things. And when I talk about work, I am talking about all areas of work. When we talk about the industry parts, though, we're probably talking about your paid work. And so I want to talk a bit about why and give you some context about why I think the faith and work conversation is so important. And I have some data to support that. The punchline is because everybody works, whether you're working in paid or unpaid, everybody is doing some type of work throughout their day. And so it is a context through which they view the world. And there's actually some data about that and the importance of that context. There's a survey company, you've probably heard of it, Gallup, and they decided a number of years ago to try to do a survey called What's the Whole Wide World Thinking? They were looking for patterns across thought that were similar no matter what context you came from. And they found something quite staggering. This survey covered 167 countries. They tried to make it statistically significant in the variety of contexts they covered, whether you were rural poor, urban center, affluent, et cetera, et cetera. And so this survey came out, and the CEO of Gallup said they found the most interesting finding that they have ever found in the history of Gallup. And I'm going to share a quote with you. Humans used to desire love, money, food, shelter, safety, peace, and freedom more than anything else. The last 30 years have changed us. This was done before COVID, by the way. The last 30 years have changed us, and now people want to have a good job, and they want their children to have a good job. That, I don't know if you caught that. Good job popped in this survey as more important than love, money, food, shelter, safety, peace, and freedom. And so the CEO says this changes everything for world leaders, everything they do from waging war to building societies, I would say to pastoring churches, to working in banks, needs to be carried out within the new context of the need for a good job. And pastors and the faith needs to be thought through the context of this is a felt need for people. So a good job is seemingly one of the most important things in people's minds. And so it is a context by which we can think about our faith. And so when I start to talk about what is faith and work, I talk about that work is the main context through which people are viewing the world. They're viewing it through their families, they're viewing it through their cities, they're viewing it through the neighborhoods, they're viewing it through their political lens, but work is one of the main contexts through which they're viewing the world. And so integrating faith into work allows people to embrace the gospel's impact on their work. And if they really embrace the gospel's impact on their work, that is going to mobilize them to really start to be an ambassador for Christ. And that will really push them towards seeking renewal in their cities through relationships, through the systems they encounter, through the organizations they're part of, through the places they're part of, et cetera, et cetera. So faith and work is really an agent of heart change and city and industry impact. So that's setting a little framework for you. I would love for you all to put in the chat. In fact, I'll go back a slide. Put in the chat when someone says to you, oh, what do you think about your faith and your work? How would you describe that? Give it in kind of one phrase. You can throw that into the comments. So just if you're out there in Wonderland, give me one comment into the chat about what does faith and work mean to you. And I'll keep moving as you all are doing that. Work matters. Great. I agree. Work matters. So making meaning out of the work. Thank you, Ivan, wherever you are. And so a lot of times people see one part of faith and work, and often the thought process is that it's truncated. And so somebody might say, oh, faith and work means I share the gospel with my cube mates in my office, or I need to reform my industry, or my faith and work means I work in a helping profession and that other professions are not as faithful, or I'm a social impact entrepreneur. I'm really trying to change something because of my faith. Some people think it means listening to God's voice, praying at work, making ethical decisions, helping hurting people. And the truth is that it is all of it, and that faith and work is a very holistic way of thinking about work, but not everybody is necessarily called to participate in every single piece of it. So somebody who is working in a helping profession, perhaps a nurse, may be doing that out of an expression of their faith. So they might not be a social entrepreneur, but they are still listening to God's voice, and they're praying about their work, and they're helping hurting people, and they're probably sharing the gospel. They might be able to reform their industry. So it's a rather holistic thing. And so framework number one I'm going to take us through that helps us understand the holisticness of it is what taking the biblical narrative and looking at work through the lens of the biblical narrative. And so probably most of you are familiar with the biblical narrative, and that is the story of God's work in the world. And it starts with creation, and then we read about the fall, and then there's redemption and restoration. I'm going to talk about each of those and talk to you about work through that lens. So let's talk about creation first. So chapter 1, Genesis, very first line of our scriptures is God creating. He is working in the very first line of the scriptures. And later we find out that we have been made in the image of God. So if we are in the image of God, and the very first thing that we see in the entire scripture is God at work, guess what? We were created to work. This was actually mind-blowing to me. I spent a good 20 years of my career, 15 or 20 years of my career, never really understanding that me working was part of the image of God in me and something I was created to do. I just thought it's what I did to get the money to pay my rent, to get a little bit of self-actualization and meaning, maybe get some status, maybe survive. I didn't necessarily see it as part of what God created me to do. And if we go further into Genesis, we see in the creation story, 5 times in a row, he takes chaos and he brings structure, and he calls it good. So chaos, structure, calls it good. Chaos, structure, calls it good. And then he gets to the 6th day, chaos, structure, that's the human, and calls it very good. And so he makes these very good humans from chaos to structure, and then sends them out and says, go out, create flourishing. He says, be fruitful and multiply. He says, take dominion over. And he really is, that can be paraphrased into the cultural mandate, which we say is to go out and create flourishing. And so what's so amazing, here we have the image of God in us. Every single job that I've been able to come up with is an example of taking chaos, bringing structure, and trying to call it good, hopefully for flourishing. And so if you're doing a spreadsheet in a banking job, you're taking the chaos of not understanding quantitatively what's happening with the company. You're organizing it, bringing chaos, trying to call it good. If you are working at home with toddlers, you are changing their diaper. That is chaos. You are bringing structure to it. You're cleaning them, bringing hygiene, bringing structure, trying to call it good. If you work in the arts, you're taking the chaos of all these ideas. You're trying to bring words or musical notes or beauty in film to create a story to try to call it good. And so I love this, that in the first chapters of Genesis, we see a model for all work. We learn that we have the image of God in us, and therefore we are created for work. I think it's incredibly motivating. But the fall happened. And as you know, the fall, sin comes into the world. And a lot of my theology from my early years of Christianity was just that people make mistakes and those are sins. But what I've come to learn is that the fall penetrates everything in the world. Individuals, systems, companies, all kinds of things have sin within them in the world. So systems and people have brokenness. And we learn as well that work will have toil. And so sometimes in the West, in the Western part of the world, we hear the phrase, if you really love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. And I think that is not true. I think that work is hard. We are guaranteed in Scripture, promised that it will have toil. And so now we can understand that. We can expect that. So we can know we were created for it, and we can know and expect that it is going to be hard and it is going to have toil. But there is a redemptive part of the story. And so the redemptive part of the story is that God becomes human and comes down into the world because of all this brokenness. And he begins to reveal to us how we can push against the brokenness and towards what's to come in the new heaven and the new earth by through the Holy Spirit. He leaves with us through choices we make to follow him and through watching his example. And so in the prayer that Jesus taught us to pray, he says, on earth as it is in heaven. And so that's really an amazing way for us to think about our work. How can we think about our work on earth as it is in heaven? He also talks to us about the Great Commission and about the Great Commandments to love others. And he talks about the need to bring mercy and justice to things. And so we can do our work. We can take this chaos and bring structure out of it and try to bring flourishing to communities with this on earth as it is in heaven mindset. And we're in this already but not yet time while we're waiting for the new heaven and the new earth. And so we get to join. And then we have restoration. And restoration is when Jesus comes again and he is over Lord of all, here and now. And there will be no more pain and no more, gnashing of teeth. And what's so interesting about new heaven and new earth, it's not most likely the harps on the clouds that were in the posters on the wall in my Sunday school children's classes or my children's Bibles. This was also a really big aha for me as I started to study it. The new heaven and the new earth, if you look in Isaiah and if you look in Revelation, it appears that the new heaven and new earth is going to be in city. And there are also evidences that commerce will be in the new heaven and the new earth. In Isaiah, and throughout the Bible, actually, the ships of Tarsus are actually used to show some of the greed and idolatry and maybe brokenness in commercial things. But then the ships of Tarsus show up in the new heaven and the new earth. So it's a little bit of a signpost that there will be commercial undertakings in the new heaven and the new earth. So it's very big encouragement to understand that the commercial things we're doing here and now, they aren't just to perhaps make money to feed our families and maybe give some money to the church or to some nonprofits. We actually are working towards what commerce might look like in the new heaven and the new earth. Now, nursing may not be in the new heaven and the new earth because there's not going to be any illness. So maybe nurses get to be musicians in the new heaven and the new earth. I don't know. But I think an imagination about restoration really helps us kind of pre-enact what we're pushing for in the already, but the not yet right now. So I'm going to move you to framework 2, which is Heart Community World. And Heart Community World is really a way of, if the biblical narrative is a way of framing your work kind of at a high level perspective, this is bringing it down more to a day in, day out personal perspective about ways you can engage with your work. And so we'll start with heart first. So if you look at the heart perspective includes, and I'm sorry, it looks like my icon didn't come through when my slides were loaded, but that black square, if you're seeing it, should have a heart in it. But the heart perspective is really the vertical relationship between an individual and Jesus Christ, an individual and the Holy Spirit, an individual and God. And so there's a vertical relationship through which Christians understand their brokenness at work. So why, to understand that they have sin at work. So understanding that, wow, why do I feel the need to get the credit for that project? Goodness. Why am I really jealous about the project that other person got? Why am I so incredibly angry that that person's disagreeing with my ideas? And so when we understand our own brokenness at work, it helps us be more grateful for the work that Christ has done. And helps us, the fruit of this, that gratitude then fills us with love that enables the fruit of the Spirit to come out of us. It also reflects a dependency on Christ for identity. So I'm okay. I am okay because my identity is in Christ. I don't have to be the heroic teacher all the time that is saving children. I don't have to be, the best banker in the world. I don't have to, not everything is in my work. I am okay. I'm just working where I have been placed. I'm okay because my identity is in Christ, not my work. And that heart work also gives us the experience of the fruit of the Spirit. And it really can be summarized through this deep communing with Christ so that we can hear God's voice. And then there's the community piece. And if the square had picked up the icon, that's a sense of community. And so Christians, if we think about the community mindset, it's Christians who seek to love others as Christ loved them. So really that upside down economy of other, understanding common grace in the workplace. And what I mean by common grace is that the good work comes out of all humans in the world, whether they believe in God or not. Good work can come out of them. And that common grace believes that good work coming out of anyone is of God, whether they believe it or not. So a real easy way to say that is if you found out tomorrow you had brain cancer, do you want the very best brain cancer removing your tumor out of your brain, or do you want a Christian brain surgeon that maybe isn't the best brain surgeon? Maybe they are, but maybe they're not. And so the fact that the best brain surgeon may not believe in God, we still can believe that the image of God in that person is why he is the best brain surgeon. We can also realize that the gospel changes how we interact with everyone in our workplace. So it's really easy to understand how it impacts our colleagues or our bosses or our clients. But take it a step further. What does the gospel mean to the way you impact with your competitor? So that's where things really get interesting. Think about, how do you deal with your competitors in the workplace? I mean, maybe it's competitors for the work within the company. Maybe it's competitors outside the company. But there's a different way of being that comes from the fruit of the Spirit that is about other more than about self, while still seeking excellence. And it helps us realize that the gospel impacts how we interact with our various systems and communities in our spheres. And so now I'm going to go to the third one, which is community. And so if we think about community, I'm sorry, I need to go. Oh, this is world. It just has the wrong title. I'm sorry. So this is framework to the world. So heart, community, world. And so the world is Christians who see their work as part of God's unfolding plan in the world. And they understand the innate goodness and brokenness in their industries, which we're going to cover for a few minutes later in the presentation. We're going to analyze that. And they see the opportunity to shine light on darkness within their industry. And that's a way to be the priesthood of all believers in the here and now. And they see the opportunity they seek the opportunity to really represent God's goodness in the world within their industry and God's fruit within their industry. And so that's the way they can impact their industries, their cities, and even the world through pushing against some of this darkness. And so now I'm going to move to framework number 3. I'm going through a lot of frameworks really quickly, and then hopefully it'll all come together when I tell some stories at the end. So framework number 3 is about engaging all that God asks of us at work by seeing both personal brokenness and system brokenness. And so in this framework, it's a 2x2, and the vertical axis of this framework is how aware are you of the personal brokenness of yourself and of others? So basically, how much do you acknowledge how deeply sinful humans are? And so you either have a really high awareness of that, or you can be anywhere on the spectrum. Maybe you have a really low awareness of that. And honestly, it could probably change day to day, week to week, month to month. And the horizontal axis is how aware of you of broken systems. And so I've had 3 children with some pretty significant illnesses. And when a child, they're all grown now, they're all okay. But when a child has to go into the hospital, if you were the advocate for a patient in the hospital, you pretty quickly learn that because of some of the dynamics of healthcare in the US, with the third-party payer system being disconnected from the provider, being disconnected from the patient, that triad, that there's some brokenness in the system. And if you were in the hospital for 5 days, I can almost assure you that even if every doctor, nurse, technician, et cetera, acted perfectly with no sin, something would go a little bit wrong. And so systems are broken too. We have interview bias when we interview people in HR settings. That's something that's kind of a system brokenness, is that an interview bias can go through a system. So there's a lot of ways to think about broken systems. There's a lot of way to think about personal brokenness. And I would take the position that we really need to have a full understanding of personal brokenness and system brokenness to most fully embrace what God asks of us at our work. And I'll walk you through that a little bit. So if you have a high view of personal brokenness, but a low view of system brokenness, and that might be because of your denomination upbringing. Some denominations focus more on one than the other. Could be a variety of reasons. Chances are your faith and work expression will most naturally look like ethics. You're very aware of your own sin. You're aware of other people's sins. You want to do the right thing. You want to be the good guy. You want to not sin at work. You want to do a really good job. And evangelism, because you are so aware of brokenness and because you know that Jesus Christ is the answer to that, you really want to share that great news to people. You care about that. You care about people. And so those are most likely your 2 default faith and work expressions if you just show up and don't think about it. On the other hand, if you are very, very aware of broken systems, but you're less aware of your personal brokenness or the personal brokenness of others, you're like, yeah, we sin, but for the most part, we're pretty good. But you really see that elementary schools in really rich neighborhoods have tremendously more opportunities and resources than elementary schools in really poor neighborhoods. And that is a systemic brokenness. So you see some of these system brokennesses, you by default may be more likely to err towards faith and work expressions that look like social impact. So trying to fix broken systems. Now, if you're low on both, you probably really are thinking mostly about yourself, to be honest. You're not thinking about taking your faith expression into the workplace, and you're probably a nominal Christian. If you don't really see brokenness in either, you're probably not really engaging Christianity. Maybe you grew up Christian, maybe you don't think much about it. But if you are high on both, you have a high view of personal brokenness, you have a very high awareness of system brokenness, it suddenly starts to unleash the things we talked about earlier. Suddenly you see your role of the cultural mandate to go out and create flourishing in your communities. And you cannot create flourishing without loving others and pushing against broken systems. And you see the great commandment that you're supposed to love God. You know, loving God is trying to understand what he wants, and loving others. And loving others means taking care of people all around you as you think through your role in the workplace. And then you see the great requirement of mercy and justice. And we see that in Micah, and we see it again in Matthew, and we see it again in other places in the New Testament. And all these ways of loving others and bringing mercy and justice in the work and looking for flourishing in the work and creating things in the work which is also part of the cultural mandate. All these things end up leading to organic versions of the Great Commission. So suddenly the fruit coming out of you makes people go, what's going on there? Maybe they ask you about it. And then maybe you have these amazing opportunities to formally evangelize, but rather organically. And so neither the top left box or the bottom right box are wrong. They're just a more truncated version than the fullness of what is asked of us in the Bible. And understanding brokenness in both ways pulls us towards the fullness. So now taking those three frameworks and breaking them down into some specific industry work, I want to take two industries. So I'm going to take banking and film, just because I think they're pretty different from each other. And I'm going to think about how and show you how you could take your industry or even a subset of your industry. Perhaps you could take marketing. Maybe you do marketing within a large corporation. And so you can take an industry or a subset of your industry, and you can think about it through creation, fall, redemption, restoration. And by doing this, you're going to be able to find the creational goodness in your work that can keep you motivated and hopeful and inspired no matter what you do. And then we're going to look for some of the wicked brokenness in your work that you can think about, based on where I sit in the organization and the responsibility I have in my sphere of influence, what small things can I do to push against that brokenness out of the power of the Holy Spirit and out of my gratitude for what Christ has done? And so it's really interesting because you can also do this in secular language. You can sit down with a group of people in your company and you can walk them through this analysis and not say one word about the Bible, because this stuff is true. So it translates to secular language. And so if the lens is creation, fall, redemption, restoration, I can show you that it can also work as ought, is, can, will. And so I'm going to show you that through analyzing two industries. So let's start with creation. So one way to say it is, if at the time of creation everything was perfect, so the creational goodness of something is its most perfect state, we can also say, what ought it to have been if it was perfect? So when somebody invents something new, so ChatGPT, what ought it to be if it could be perfect? I'm not going to analyze that one. I'm going to leave that to some of you, but we'll analyze banking. So what ought banking to be if it is in its most perfect, creationally good state? It should be and I'm talking about commercial banking mostly. It should be a redistribution of resources from those who have many to those who need them in a fair and equitable way for more things to flourish, right? So a bunch of people have deposits at the bank lends those deposits to people that need loans. Those people take those loans, they build new things, they create more flourishing. So banking really does have some creational goodness, and then it allows the sharing of resources for a bigger piece of pie of flourishing for all. Likewise, film has some great creational goodness. Film represents truth and beauty in a format that can move the heart and the mind to believe something that is true in a way that numbers or language or talking or a book cannot. So both of those industries represent God's goodness, but the fall came. And so what is the truth about those industries now? They are fallen. So we know what it ought to have been. What is it? Well, banking does redistribute resources, but there is compensation distortion. If you look at the lowest paid to the CEO, it's rather crazy. There is access inequity. Some of the people who need the loans most and who actually have businesses that are showing they could repay the loans maybe don't have a credit history yet, so they have access inequity because perhaps they're too rich, or not too rich, what's the word I'm looking for? They're too high of a risk for the bank. And then there's transactionalism. And so sometimes people are looking for arbitrage holes, things like that becomes not at all about the people anymore, not at all about things flourishing. It becomes about financial transactions. In film, there's payment and equity. I'm very good friends with a filmmaker, and she's a Christian, and she tries to be very careful about what the back crew and the lighting people, et cetera, are paid, even at the expense of her profits. Film is quite sexualized. It's quite violent unnecessarily. Those are some other areas of brokenness. And so let's talk about the can. So what can it be? If Christians like locked arms and said, let's bring these industries back towards their creational goodness. And it's happening. There's pockets of this happening all over the place. So I know a Christian who works at Goldman Sachs, and her entire career is around programs of access to Goldman Sachs services for people who have traditionally been not included in those services. There can be some pay distribution thoughts. There can be a care program. What if a care program for individuals with distressed loans? What if every single person whose loan was under distress and they were about to go bankrupt, what if the bank provided them mental health care resources? So I actually had someone I worked with a few years ago that did the analysis on that. If the bank was able to pay for mental health resources for someone under that amount of anxiety that they were going to go bankrupt, if only I can't remember the numbers exactly, but if only 2% of those people were able to repay their loan over time because they stayed more mentally healthy, then the whole thing paid for itself. So what if the bank thought that way? In film, what if, I know an actor that I've worked with, and this actor, she is willing to play any role in any film as long as the natural consequences of the sinful actions are revealed. So for instance, she will be a woman who commits adultery in the film as long as the chaos and the pain and the nightmare of adultery is shown and not glamorized. And so what if all films showed the truth of that types of decisions? What if the hours, and that's in fact, the film industry is all in a big union negotiation a lot on some of these issues around hours and pay and whatnot. What if the hours of the crew were thought of carefully? Sometimes people on the crew have to work over 110 hours a week during a filming of a film. That's what they have to do to be in this industry and to survive and be paid enough. But that's a number of work hours that begins to become inhumane. So what if that was rethought? And so then we think restoration. And so it starts to look a lot like creation. So what if banking in the new heaven and the earth is just a perfect, equitable, fair, and accessible redistribution of capital amongst society while still making the profits that it needs to make? And what if in film there's truth and beauty in a format that moves the heart and mind towards truthful stories? And so that is a way to think about your industry. And so I would encourage you, if this is interesting to you, after this webinar, tonight, tomorrow, this weekend, stop and run your own industry or your own segment of your industry through this lens. And do this in prayer and see what is revealed to you about areas that you're like, that's broken. And I actually could push against that a little bit. I have an opportunity to do that. And so I'm going to tell you a couple of stories of change that really were inspired by these models. And so for about 5 years, I taught an intensive that people went through for 10 months. And this intensive was the Heart Community World Model. And so there was very intentional focus on the vertical relationship in God, understanding our brokenness, communing deeply with God, learning to hear his voice, so that we could look at our communities and at our world, our industries, our cities, and think about what God might be calling us towards, what things of brokenness we might be able to impact. And in that course, towards the end, there's a project we called the Cultural Renewal Project. And in the Cultural Renewal Project, you needed to analyze something in your work through this lens, what's creationally good and what's broken. And based on who I am, what my gifts are, where I sit in this company or in this industry, what is one small thing I could take on? It could be something like, it could be as small as rerouting how a file goes through a decision system. It could be as large as taking on something significant like pay and equity in the system. So I want to tell you about this guy. I'm going to call him Dave just to give him a name, but his name was not Dave. Dave was, when he came to me, he was a middle manager in a very large publicly traded company. And that particular company's service that it provided the world was a type of healthcare clinic that provided a certain service. And Dave, before he went to business school, he got an MBA. Before he went to business school, he worked 4 years in the nonprofit world, and particularly in Haiti on poverty alleviation. So Dave works in poverty alleviation, goes to Stanford Business School, the best of the best, and then he ends up as this middle manager in this company. And he came to this course and he said, wow, I am super frustrated. I am working in healthcare, which should be helping the world. I do not see how my work is meaningful to God. And so I'm in this class to kind of take a last ditch effort to try to figure out if I need to go back to nonprofit. But I really feel that I was called to business. I feel I'm very good at business, but I'm very frustrated. So he gets to the Cultural Renewal Project and he comes to me one day and he said, I can't come up with anything I can push against. I was like, And I really honestly didn't know what to say. So I said, well, why don't we both pray about it? Because it seemed like a good thing to say. Let's go to God and see what he has to say about this. And so he agreed to pray about it for a couple of days or a couple of weeks. And he called me one morning and he said, oh my goodness, I woke up in the middle of the night and I really feel like I was nudged with seeing something that's dark. I was like, tell me about it. He said 70% of the employees that report to me are minimum wage workers. And he said, what came to me was when they are absent, they tend to be absent when they have unexplained absences. So not like a vacation. When they have an unexplained or unexpected absence, it tends to be a much longer unexpected absence than my people that are in the more white collar professional jobs. And I want to research what's going on with that, because I've learned that they are the working poor and that even though they are working, they have a hard time meeting their obligations. I said, that sounds super interesting. Go learn. Tell me what you find out. So he comes back and he says, oh my goodness, I have found out that if my car battery breaks down, I can either take an Uber and only be about 15 minutes late to work, call AAA, have my car towed, and my car is back on the road probably before the end of the workday, and I missed maybe an hour of work at most. But when one of my minimum wage workers' cars breaks down, it tends to be a 3-day affair. They only have one car that they share for the family. In this city, the buses, it would take like 2 or 3 hours to get to the store to buy the battery. Then they are not going to take it to the battery store. They're going to wait for someone in their apartment complex to come home who will install the battery for almost free. Meanwhile, the other car is going with the other 2 workers in the family. So meanwhile, he said, for a broken battery, someone maybe has missed a full 2, maybe even 3 days of work. And so this was just a small example of a symptom. And he started looking at the data in the system, and it was chronic and correlated. That the lower someone was paid, the longer their unexpected absences were. So he designed all these ways to help with the unexpected absences. And so he designed this very elaborate, basically emergency expense reimbursement program or rides program, all these fancy ways to get people to the clinics. The people wanted to be at work. They weren't getting paid if they weren't at work, if they had unexpected absences. The clinic needed them at work. The clinics had a lot of problems if the technicians that were really running part of the clinic operations weren't there. The clinic couldn't see as many patients as it needed to see. And so honestly, this project went onto a shelf for a while. And so this project is on this shelf, and then he gets interviewed for another position in the company, and the HR director said, have you been working on anything that's not in your job description that is creative? I mean, what an incredible softball he was thrown for the HR director to ask this. He was like, and I mean, I honestly think God nudged that question so this project could come out. And he said, absolutely, I have. And he told her the story of this project. She's not a Christian. He told her the story of this project, and she was like, that's interesting. And he didn't hear anything about it again. And then about a month or two later, someone else in the company called him and said, "Hey, Dave, did you convince Mary that our lowest paid workers are the working poor and they're actually in poverty?" And he said, "Actually, I may have. Why?" And he said, "We have been trying to convince Mary that it would be profitable and good and right for our company to pay for the nursing tuition for these technicians to be able to expand their career opportunities. And she didn't want to pay for all of their tuition. She just wanted to pay for a little of it." And we're saying, it's not working. Nobody's taking it up if they have to pay. And she came into a meeting and said, "Dave, prove to me why this program isn't working. We've got to pay for all of their tuition. They can't pay for any of their tuition." And so this ended up being this beautiful story where he was nudged by the Holy Spirit. He noticed something broken. His solution was one way. He took the solution to someone. The solution ended up not being the solution. Maybe it is, but it led to something else that created a beautiful career track for an entire group of minimum wage employees across the entire nation at this company. And so I love this story because it's not tied up in a red bow. I can't just say, he saw this, he fixed it, everything's good. It had this very circuitous route that really, to me, is kind of the way God works. He works in such interesting, circuitous ways that we sometimes don't even understand. And so I think my encouragement is just of the unbelievable beauty that shows up if we commune deeply with Christ and we try to understand what areas of brokenness we are sitting right in and what ways we might be able to come alongside in revealing some things or showing some things. And then not be super tied to the outcomes. Just let's see what God does here. And so that's one example. I have several more, but I think for the sake of time and for the sake of a rich Q&A, I'm going to stop for a moment and let's hear from you all.
That was really fantastic. We had some questions that came in here. I think super helpful way I love the 3 different frameworks you gave for us. And particularly in CCO world, we talk about that creation, fall, redemption, restoration framework a lot. And I know for me, really that the last part in the restoration one, the point you made about the work people do now is a precursor, I think is the word you used, for the new creation. Like there'll still be work there, and the work we're doing now is actually going to matter not just now, but for eternity. That was really a remarkable way to think about it. My question that I have that have come through here, if people are more interested in learning about this idea of how faith and work connects, being part of God's restoration in the world, what can you give us some resources, some books, some things to go, and maybe YouTube videos or whatever it may be? What are some places where people could dig in?
Oh, sure. Well, first of all, a lot of cities that you all are sitting in may have Faith and Work Institutes. So I would, just Google Faith and Work Center or Faith and Work Institute in Austin or in Columbus, and there may be classes right where you are. The book that really unlocked things for me is called Every Good Endeavor. It's by Tim Keller and Catherine Alsdorf. Really helped me understand the idolatry part of work, which expanded my gratefulness for the work of Christ, which then led me to seek more, that then I started understanding the redemptive restoration piece of the equation. Another book is Visions of Vocation by Steve Garber. There's an author that, since I know that you work with a lot of college students, there's an author named Jordan Rayner who writes, does a lot of social media and writes, and has a bit of a younger voice that may especially appeal to people in their 20s. There are several Faith and Work podcasts. The Denver Institute for Faith and Work has a really good Faith and Work podcast. So those are a few resources that I would immediately point you to. If you're in, I don't know if I have very many pastors here. If you're in the pastor world, where I used to work at City to City, does a lot of work and does an intensive to train pastors how to actually implement some of this into your churches. And so Lauren Gill at City to City would be a good resource also.
That's great. Yeah, you mentioned pastors, and I think for us, our model of working with college students is to partner with a local church. So church is a big part of what we do. Uh, one of the questions that came in is why is this conversation so important in churches? To be talking about it in churches, and what would you say to
Oh, oh goodness. Okay. Like I could get on a soapbox on this one. So I was in the church for I don't know how many decades and never had any sermon of any sort that connected to my work. And that's the experience. And I'm not complaining about my pastors. That's the experience of most of us. There was someone formally did a survey on this, and they went to a church, a mainline church on the East Coast, and they looked at almost 10 years worth of sermons. I think it was like 500 and something sermons. And guess how many had dealt with work in any capacity? I think it was 3. It was less than 5. I think it was 3. So 10 years you could go to church and not hear about your work a single time. And so it has created this dichotomy that if you're a Christian, there's a hierarchy of work that pastors are best.
Mm-hmm.
They're doing the most work for God. Helping professions next, teachers, nurses, corporate next, everything else next, and then lowest of the low, investment bankers, consultants, private equity. And I had worked a chunk of the D team. I'd worked a lot of my career on the D team. And I actually switched from the D team to helping professions because of bad faith and work theology. I loved it. I loved my time in school. But my mentality was I'm doing something better for the world. And that was wrong. And so it's so interesting. I was doing something good for the world, but it wasn't necessarily better. And so I think what's amazing is when you catch a fever for it, you start to understand all the goodness that can come of work. And if churches can do that, if churches can build industry prayers into their faith and work, if they can build examples into their sermons, it's amazing what can happen. Barna, which is a religious survey organization, lots of other things too, but they actually did a survey and they looked at the correlation between faith and work integrators, so people in their pews that understood these concepts versus all other Christians, and how much they contributed to their church life. And so it turns out, I think sometimes pastors are like, oh, if I teach them all this, are they going to run away and do all their volunteering out there? It turns out that faith and work integrators read their Bible more, volunteer more, pray more. All of the things that we're hoping for in churches happens through faith and work integration. Or it may not be causal, it may be associative, but it puts people on fire to know that what they're doing all day, every day actually matters to God. And it also allows them to see themselves on mission 40 hours a week instead of like 1 hour of volunteer time a month. And then like my final point on that topic, I read an article. I did not figure this out myself. I read an article. Jesus has around 34 unique parables. 27 of them have work as either the main context or the purpose of the parable.
Wow.
So Jesus did this. Jesus explained faith to us through the context of work. Jesus did this. But most of the sermons we go to, they're explaining it through the context of family or through the context of, taking care of the poor. And those are good things. I don't want to take those away. I just want to build work in.
Super helpful. Yeah. Sounds like we could do a whole nother lab on that with you.
We could do a lab on that. I get a little feisty about that.
You're definitely passionate about that. It makes, I 100% bought into, heard team A, B, C, D, growing up. Another question we have here, do you have any advice for avoiding the burnout that comes with feeling overwhelmed by all the things that can be done?
Okay, so I just walked 500 miles on the Camino de Santiago because I hit a bit of burnout and I needed a reset. So the cobbler has no shoes on this, but she's trying to get some shoes. So I will say, I think the key to it is that vertical relationship. That vertical relationship with God and communing with God and being, what does God have you on mission to do? So that story I told you about Dave, God said, Dave, you want to go back to Haiti and work with the poor? 70% of your workers are poor. I have you managing tons of poor people, help those poor,
Yeah.
right? That is basically what washed over Dave. And so Dave could have worked on the legal issues of something, and his, this company was around a particular type of healthcare. But in that time with God, he was called on to this. And then I would also just say that God rested, right? The Genesis account shows us that God rested.
Yep.
And it showed us to be in community and to ask for help. And when we don't rest, what we are saying to God is, we do not believe your promises. We believe we have to do more to be okay. And so I think just the simple boundary of what does rest mean is a restorative act towards not being overwhelmed.
It's fantastic. Thank you. It's great. And how about one more? We're running out of time. We're getting there, but maybe you can just bring it home. I just enjoyed the story you told with Dave, but maybe you give us like one last example of how this plays out in another industry, maybe fashion or something like that, and bring us home with that.
Sure. I think I'm going to explain one in a restaurant industry. And so there's a guy that really wanted to bring his faith into the restaurant industry, and he'd been working in restaurants for a long time, and he wanted to do restaurant work differently. And so he wanted to treat the workers differently, and he wanted the restaurant low wage work to be an opportunity for people to learn to work in a different way. So he made a commitment that most of his workers would be coming out of situations where they couldn't work and they could get hired elsewhere. So he decided to use a restaurant to hire what he would consider unemployables, people with records, people just coming out of addiction, XYZ. Yep. And then he held them to unbelievably high standards, and they kind of got maybe one or two chances, but then they were out. But he created a community. So he tried to create a restorative community through the way he did the employees. But then on the other side, he tried to create a customer experience that was beautiful. So he wanted people only eating the most wholesome foods. So he didn't put any poor ingredients in the foods. He wanted community to be possible. And so he created community tables, and he got strangers talking to each other. And so he thought he took that lens, and he thought, what could a restaurant best be in its best version of the world? He's like, it can best be a place of togetherness, having bountiful foods to create wholeness and goodness in people to go out and serve God, and that he can take hurting people and allow the hurting people to be the ones that provide the economic model to create that experience. So he really kind of went through it from all sides. That would be harder to do in a publicly traded company. That's more of an entrepreneurial effort. But There are just so many ways to come at things in various industries.
I want to go to that restaurant. It sounds amazing.
It's in New York. Email me. I'll tell you where it is.
Okay. Oh, when I'm there, we'll go. That'd be great.
Near Times Square. You go before a musical.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll watch for the email. Thank you so much for taking your time and joining us today. I think it was really helpful and really fascinating. So appreciate it. All of you online, thanks for being there as well. And please, there'll be a little slide that comes up with some different ways to keep engaging with us, like we mentioned earlier. But Missy, thank you again. Really, really, really amazing. And look forward to maybe doing it again or having you at Jubilee coming to be a speaker there. So thanks so much. Have a great day.
Really great to talk to you. Thanks. And thanks for everyone for tuning in.